Rancher rented a house for one night, but found out an Apache woman had been hiding there for weeks. The sun had been relentless, beating down on the wide open fields, and the hard work of tending to cattle, repairing fences, and managing the land had taken more out of him than he had expected. Even the early mornings and late evenings seemed to offer little relief, as he constantly had to check the herd and ensure that every animal was accounted for. By Friday evening, he decided that he needed a break, even if it was just for one night. He wanted nothing more than a quiet space, somewhere he could rest and forget the noise and stress of ranch life. While planning his short escape, John had found a small house for rent on the edge of the desert. It was a modest building, old but sturdy, tucked away near a sparse cluster of cacti and scrub bushes. From the pictures online, it looked charming, with a small porch that caught the golden glow of the sunset and windows that opened onto the vast, open land beyond. It seemed perfect for a night of solitude. He packed his bag with some essentials, clean clothes, a small bag of food, water, and a notebook he sometimes used to write down his thoughts when the world felt overwhelming. With his pickup truck loaded, he left the ranch behind, feeling a strange mix of excitement and relief. The drive to the house was quiet, the kind of peaceful journey that made John feel free from the usual responsibilities and pressures. Dust rose behind his truck as he drove along the winding dirt road, and the landscape stretched endlessly on either side, dry and golden in the late afternoon light. Birds called to each other from the distant trees, and a gentle wind stirred the tips of the desert grass. The solitude was comforting, and he imagined the house waiting for him like a silent friend, ready to offer rest and comfort after a long, tiring week. When John arrived, the house looked even more inviting than it had online. Its wooden walls, faded by the sun, gave it a rustic charm, and the small porch creaked slightly as he stepped out of his truck. The door, though old, swung open easily with a push, revealing a simple interior. A living room with a worn rug, a few chairs, and a small kitchen with a sink and stove that looked functional, if not modern. The air smelled faintly of dust and something earthy, like the desert itself had seeped inside. It was quiet, too quiet, as if the house had been holding its breath for weeks, waiting for someone to finally arrive. John set his bag down and walked slowly through the rooms. He checked the windows, opening a few to let in the warm desert air. The breeze carried with it the scent of dry earth and distant wildflowers, a smell that reminded him of the open range back home. He noticed that some of the furniture had been left in place, chairs slightly askew, a table with a few scratches on its surface, and the faint marks of someone else's presence long ago. For a moment, he wondered who had lived here before and why the house had been empty for so long. He shrugged it off, deciding that the quiet was exactly what he needed. After unpacking a few things and settling into a chair near the window, John took a deep breath and let himself relax. The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert sky in shades of pink and orange, and he felt a rare calm settle over him. For a while, he just watched the colors change, feeling the stress of the past week slowly slipping away. He could hear the distant cry of a coyote, the rustling of dry leaves in the wind, and the faint sound of insects beginning their evening song. The world outside seemed alive, but the house remained silent and still, offering him a perfect escape from everything he had left behind. As night approached, John decided to explore the small kitchen and prepare a simple meal. He found a few canned goods and some old utensils left in a drawer. Lighting the small stove, he heated up a can of beans and poured himself a cup of water. The act of cooking, simple as it was, brought a sense of normalcy and comfort. He ate slowly, savoring the quiet and the feeling of being completely alone in a place far from the chaos of the ranch. Afterward, he washed the dishes and set them aside to dry, glancing around the room and enjoying the stillness. Once the meal was done, John moved to the bedroom to get ready for bed. The room was modest, with a single bed, a small dresser, and a window that faced the desert. He pulled back the covers and inspected the bed, finding it a little dusty but otherwise comfortable enough for a night's rest. As he lay down, he could hear the faint whisper of the wind against the walls and the occasional creak of the old wooden frame. It was different from the sounds he was used to on the ranch, quieter and stranger, but not unpleasant. It gave him a sense of being completely removed from the world, isolated in a way that was both peaceful and, he realized, slightly eerie. Hours passed as John lay awake, listening to the night. The desert was alive in its own way, filled with small sounds that he was not accustomed to. Occasionally, he thought he heard a soft shuffle or the faint brushing of something moving across the floor. At first, he dismissed it as the house settling or the wind passing through cracks in the walls, but the feeling of being watched, subtle and unexplainable, began to creep into his thoughts. He told himself it was silly. After all, he was alone here, and no one else could be around. Still, a small knot of unease grew in his stomach, making it difficult to fully relax. Curiosity eventually got the better of him. John got up and walked quietly through the house, checking the corners and closets. Everything appeared to be in place, and there were no signs of recent activity other than what he had seen himself. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the feeling, and returned to the bedroom. The night was dark outside, with only the pale light of the moon illuminating the desert. He lay back down, focusing on his breathing and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, telling himself that he would finally rest if he just let go of the strange thoughts. Sleep finally came, but it was light and uneasy. John dreamed of the desert, of figures moving in the shadows, and of the faint sound of footsteps where no one should have been. He woke once in the middle of the night, the silence of the house pressing down on him like a weight. He sat up, listening carefully, and thought he heard something, a barely audible sound, a whisper of movement from the other side of the room. His heart raced, but when he turned on the small bedside lamp, there was nothing there. He told himself it was his imagination, a combination of exhaustion and the unfamiliar surroundings. By early morning, John had gained a new appreciation for the quiet and solitude of the place. The sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long shadows and painting the sky in brilliant colors once again. Birds began their morning songs, and the wind carried the scent of earth and grass through the open windows. John stood on the porch, looking out at the vast land around him, feeling both a sense of freedom and a strange anticipation, as if the house itself was holding a secret he had yet to uncover. Little did John know, the quiet, seemingly empty house had indeed been hiding a secret. Someone had been living there, quietly, cautiously, and with reason. Someone who had made the house a refuge from a world that had become unsafe. And John, seeking only a night of rest, was about to discover a story far more extraordinary than he could have imagined. The morning sun spilled into the house through the windows, bathing the rooms in a warm, golden light. John Miller stretched and yawned, feeling a little more refreshed than the previous night. Yet, despite the peaceful morning, an uneasy feeling lingered at the back of his mind. Something about the house didn't feel quite right. It was as though it had secrets, hidden corners that whispered stories he couldn't see. He tried to shake off the feeling, telling himself that he was alone and the house was simply old and quiet. But the nagging sense of unease refused to fade. After a simple breakfast of bread and coffee, John began tidying up the house. He moved the chairs back into place, dusted the surfaces, and swept the small floor. As he worked, he noticed little details that he hadn't seen before. A few footprints, light and dusty, led from the kitchen to the back door. At first, he thought perhaps it was leftover from the previous renter, but something about the prints felt fresh, as if they had been made not long ago. He knelt down, examining them more closely, and realized they were smaller than his own boots, more delicate in shape. A shiver ran down his spine. John stood up and looked around carefully. The house seemed completely empty, yet the signs were there, undeniable in the dusty sunlight. A faint smell of smoke lingered near the kitchen, as if someone had cooked there recently. A cup, half cleaned and set on the counter, caught his eye. He frowned, wondering how long ago the place had really been empty. He checked the cupboards and drawers, finding some food had been opened, though not by him. The quiet of the morning suddenly felt heavier, almost as if the walls themselves were aware of his discovery. He decided to explore the house more thoroughly. John moved from room to room, opening closets and cupboards, tapping walls, and listening to the soft echoes in the empty spaces. Everything seemed normal at first: old furniture, worn carpets, the faint creak of floorboards under his weight, but then he noticed it. A small corner of the bedroom had marks on the wall as if someone had leaned against it for weeks. A blanket, slightly wrinkled and tucked into the corner of the bed, had the faint impression of a person's weight. John froze, staring at it, his mind racing. Had someone really been here, hiding in this house? The thought was unsettling and yet strangely fascinating. Who would hide here in this quiet, remote place? And why? John felt a mix of fear and curiosity. He stepped slowly toward the bedroom, every sense alert. His boots made soft sounds against the wooden floor, the echo traveling through the empty rooms. The closer he got, the more he noticed the subtle signs of life. A faint dust line on the floor, a small patch of disturbed carpet, the smell of earth and something faintly floral that he could not identify. Someone had been here, not just passing through, but living quietly, cautiously. John's heart pounded as he realized the seriousness of the situation. If someone was hiding in the house, they must have had a reason. He thought of all the possibilities: maybe a traveler, someone lost, or someone escaping danger. The thought that a person might be frightened, alone, and hiding just a few steps away stirred something protective in him. He wanted to help, but he also knew he needed to be careful. The wrong move could startle whoever it was, and he had no idea how they might react. He walked back to the living room, taking a deep breath to steady himself. John decided to leave a small sign of goodwill. He placed some fresh water in a cup and a small plate of bread on the counter, careful to set it where anyone who might be hiding could see it. He stepped back and waited, listening to the soft morning sounds outside, the wind rustling through the dry grass, the distant calls of birds, and the faint hum of insects beginning their daily rhythm. He felt the tension slowly building in him, mixed with anticipation. Would someone appear? Would they trust him? Hours passed without a sound. John continued to tidy the house, occasionally glancing toward the bedroom and the small corners where someone might be hiding. His curiosity grew, but he reminded himself to remain calm. He thought of how lonely and frightening it must be for anyone to hide for so long, day after day, in silence. He could almost imagine the routine: sneaking around to avoid detection, finding little food, sleeping in uncomfortable positions, and always listening, always alert. The thought made him both anxious and compassionate. Whoever it was, they were surviving through courage and patience. By midday, John had nearly convinced himself that perhaps he had been imagining things. Maybe the footprints were old, maybe the blanket had been left behind by someone who had already left. He sat down near the window, sipping his coffee, and tried to focus on the desert outside. The sun was high in the sky now, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Cacti stood like silent sentinels, and the horizon stretched endlessly, warm and inviting. But even in the beauty of the desert, his mind kept returning to the hidden presence he suspected. Then he heard it, a faint shuffle, soft enough that it could have been mistaken for the wind. John's head snapped toward the sound. It came from the bedroom just beyond the door. He froze, listening intently. There it was again, a barely audible movement like someone shifting carefully on the floor. His pulse quickened. This was no longer a theory. Someone was here, hiding in the house. The realization brought both fear and a strange thrill. He knew he needed to approach with care, to show he meant no harm. John took a deep breath and stepped slowly toward the bedroom. He spoke softly, almost whispering so as not to startle the person inside. "Hello, is someone there?" There was no response, only the quiet rustle of movement. He paused, trying to think of what to do next. He didn't want to scare them, but he also wanted to make contact, to show that he was friendly. "I don't mean any harm," he added, his voice gentle. I just want to help if I can. John noticed the faint marks on her clothing, dusty from weeks of hiding, and the way she held herself, alert and ready to retreat if necessary. He realized she must have been living here for some time, careful to avoid detection. Yet there was a quiet strength about her, a calm in her eyes that told him she had survived through intelligence and courage. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, measuring trust and intent. John kept his hands visible, moving slowly, making no sudden gestures. The woman's eyes scanned him from head to toe, and he could feel the tension in the room, thick and heavy. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded, as if acknowledging that he did not mean harm. John offered her a small smile, his own way of showing that he could be trusted. It was a silent agreement between two strangers who had just discovered one another in unusual circumstances. John took a step closer, careful not to invade her space. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I'm just a traveler. I rented this house for the night. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to understand." The woman's gaze softened slightly, though she remained cautious. She said nothing, only looked at him, as if weighing his words and deciding whether to believe them. The tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a fragile sense of connection. Hours passed as John and the woman cautiously observed each other, neither making sudden movements, both aware of the delicate balance of trust forming between them. He left more food and water where she could see it, giving her the choice to accept it. She eventually moved closer, taking the offerings with quiet gratitude. It was a small but significant gesture, a step toward understanding. John realized that this encounter was not just about curiosity. It was about recognizing another human being's struggle, their bravery, and their need for compassion. By evening, a sense of calm settled over the house, though the tension of the morning lingered. John knew that the woman had been through much more than he could imagine. She had survived alone, hiding in silence, and now, slowly, trust was beginning to bridge the gap between them. He felt a mixture of relief, respect, and awe. The house, which had seemed ordinary just a day ago, had transformed into a place of human connection, a temporary refuge where two strangers had met under extraordinary circumstances. As night fell, John reflected on the day's events. The desert outside grew dark, the moon rising over the horizon casting silver light across the landscape. The wind whispered through the cacti, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and sage. Inside the house, the woman remained cautious but present, no longer just a shadow in the corner. John felt a deep sense of empathy for her and understood that their meeting was more than coincidence. It was a chance to witness courage, resilience, and the quiet strength of someone who had endured much in silence. The sun had begun to sink low over the desert horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. John Miller sat on the worn couch, feeling the weight of the day pressing on him. He had spent hours watching the woman move quietly through the house, careful and cautious, yet there was a subtle strength in her movements that told him she was no ordinary stranger. He had offered her food and water, and she had accepted, though her eyes never left him completely. It was clear that trust was something she had learned to guard fiercely, and he understood why. After a long silence, John finally spoke, his voice calm and gentle. "I don't want to scare you," he said. I want to understand. You don't have to tell me everything if you don't want to. I just want to know who you are and why you're here." The woman paused, her dark eyes fixed on him, measuring the sincerity of his words. She hesitated as though deciding whether to reveal her story, and John waited patiently. He knew that rushing her could break the fragile trust they had built over the day. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Nayeli," she said. "I am Apache. I have been hiding because my village is not safe. There are people who want to harm us, and I could not stay there. I came here to survive, to find a place where no one would look for me." John listened intently, every word painting a picture of bravery and fear intertwined. Nayeli's words were simple, but they carried a depth of experience far beyond her years. He could sense the hardships she had endured, the constant alertness, and the courage it must have taken to remain hidden for so long. John nodded slowly. "I understand," he said quietly. "You must have been very careful to stay hidden for so long. It couldn't have been easy." Naomi's gaze softened slightly, and she allowed herself a small nod. "I did what I had to do," she replied. "Every day was a struggle. I had to find water, food, and a safe place to sleep. I had to stay quiet, avoid being seen. Sometimes I was so tired I could barely move, but I could not let anyone find me. If I had been caught—" She trailed off, her eyes dropping to the floor, and John understood the weight of the unspoken words. The threat she had faced was real, and she had survived through careful planning, patience, and courage. Curiosity overcame John's caution, and he asked gently, "How did you survive all this time? What did you eat? How did you stay safe?" Naomi thought for a moment, her eyes scanning the room as if recalling every detail of the weeks she had spent hiding. "I had to be very careful," she said finally. "I found small stores of food left behind in the house. Sometimes I foraged outside, gathering what I could from the desert, roots, berries, even small animals when I had no other choice. I avoided roads and paths where people might see me. I slept in corners under blankets, and I moved quietly at night when the world was asleep. I could not trust anyone. Trusting anyone could have been dangerous." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear now, but from the weight of remembering such hardships. John felt a surge of respect for her resilience. He could not imagine living day after day under such conditions, constantly on edge, never knowing who or what might appear. "You are incredibly strong," he said. "I cannot imagine being in your situation and staying alive as you have. You must have courage that most people do not even know exists." Naomi allowed herself a small smile, one that was fleeting but genuine. "I had no choice," she said simply. "I had to survive. That was all I could do." There was a quiet determination in her words, a sense of dignity that John could not ignore. As the evening shadows lengthened, John and Naomi began to share more about themselves. John spoke of his life on the ranch, the long hours, the hard work, and the moments of quiet beauty he found in the desert. He told her about the challenges of caring for the animals, repairing fences, and managing the land through harsh seasons. Naomi listened with interest, occasionally asking questions, her curiosity and intelligence shining through despite the fear that had kept her hidden. She seemed fascinated by the life he described, so different from the constant vigilance and isolation she had known. In return, Naomi shared more about her homeland and her family. She spoke of the traditions of her people, the stories passed down through generations, and the beauty of her village before danger had forced her to flee. She described the wide-open spaces, the rivers and forests, and the sense of community she had once known. Her voice carried a quiet longing, a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. John could feel her love for her home, even as she had been forced to leave it behind. It was a connection to something larger than herself, something that had given her the strength to endure. John realized that their conversation was not just about stories, it was about trust and understanding. Naomi had opened a door into her life, allowing him to glimpse the struggles and resilience of someone who had faced unimaginable challenges. He felt a deep respect and a sense of responsibility. He knew that he could not solve all her problems, but he could offer her kindness, safety, and perhaps a sense of human connection she had not experienced for weeks. The evening grew darker and the temperature dropped. John brought out a small blanket and offered it to Naomi. She accepted it with a nod, grateful for the simple gesture. They sat together, not speaking much, listening to the sounds of the desert night. The wind whispered through the cacti, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and sage. Crickets and other insects began their chorus, filling the quiet spaces between words. John felt a strange sense of peace in the presence of someone who had endured so much. Their silence was comfortable, a shared understanding that transcended words. After some time, John asked gently, "Do you have anywhere safe to go after this?" I can help you if you want. Naomi looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of caution and hope. I do not know, she admitted. I cannot go back to my village yet. There are still dangers. I have no one here and I do not know who to trust. I have been alone for so long. John nodded, understanding her fear. You are not alone anymore, he said softly. I will help you find a safe place. You can trust me. It was a promise, simple yet powerful, and Naomi allowed herself to believe it, if only a little. As the night deepened, John and Naomi continued to share stories. She spoke of small moments of hope she had found while hiding, like the sight of a bird at dawn, or the simple pleasure of finding clean water to drink. John shared the quiet joys of life on the ranch, the smell of fresh hay, the sound of cows lowing in the early morning, and the feeling of satisfaction after a long day of honest work. Their stories intertwined, bridging the gap between two very different lives. Despite the fear and uncertainty, a connection was forming, one built on empathy, respect, and the recognition of each other's humanity. By the time the moon was high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the desert, John realized that he had learned something profound from Naomi. She had survived weeks alone, hidden from the world, relying on her courage, intelligence, and resilience. Yet even in her solitude, she had maintained hope, waiting for a moment of kindness, a chance encounter that could offer safety and understanding. He felt humbled by her story and inspired by her strength. It was a lesson in perseverance, courage, and the quiet power of the human spirit. The night passed slowly, filled with soft conversation, quiet laughter, and shared silences. John knew that the events of the day had changed something in both of them. Naomi had revealed a part of her life that was deeply personal and difficult, and he had listened without judgment, offering compassion and support. In return, she had allowed herself to trust, even if only cautiously. It was a small step, but it was significant, a beginning of a bond that neither of them could have anticipated when John first arrived at the house that morning. As dawn approached, painting the sky with pale hues of pink and gold, John looked at Naomi and felt a sense of determination. He would help her find safety, he decided. He would do whatever he could to ensure that she was protected, that her courage would not be wasted, and that she could find a place where she could rest without fear. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to face it. And in that moment, both of them understood that life could change unexpectedly, and that even in the most unlikely places, kindness and trust could grow. The morning light filtered softly through the small windows, casting long, golden shadows across the quiet house. John Miller had woken early, his mind already turning over the events of the previous night. Naomi was still asleep in the corner of the room, wrapped in the blanket he had offered her. Seeing her there, so small and vulnerable yet remarkably composed after everything she had endured, filled John with a deep sense of protectiveness. He understood now that this was no ordinary encounter. Her presence in the house was the result of courage, desperation, and an unspoken plea for safety. As the day began, John quietly prepared a small breakfast of bread, cheese, and water, leaving it on the counter where Naomi could see it when she awoke. She stirred shortly after, her dark eyes meeting his with a cautious but grateful expression. There was a silent understanding between them. They were now companions in a moment of fragile trust. Naomi accepted the food without a word, moving carefully so as not to disturb the quiet of the house. John watched her, noticing how alert she remained, scanning the room for anything unusual. Her caution was instinctive, a skill honed by weeks of hiding. After breakfast, John decided they should plan the day carefully. He wanted to ensure that Naomi remained safe while also giving her a chance to stretch her legs after weeks of confinement. "We need to be careful," he said gently. "The desert can be beautiful, but it can also be dangerous if we're not paying attention. There are animals, rough terrain, and places where someone could spot us." Naomi nodded, listening intently. She had already begun to trust him enough to consider his advice, though she remained alert and ready to react if needed. They stepped outside together, the dry, warm air of the desert immediately enveloping them. John led the way, pointing out safe paths and areas where the land was stable. Naomi followed closely, her movements quiet and precise, as if she had been trained to move without making a sound. She asked questions about the terrain, the plants, and the small animals that moved through the brush. John answered patiently, sharing his knowledge of the desert and its hidden dangers. There was a rhythm to their interaction, a careful balance of guidance, curiosity, and mutual respect. As they walked, John noticed how attuned Naomi was to her surroundings. She paused frequently, listening to distant sounds and observing subtle changes in the landscape. Her alertness was remarkable, a reminder of the weeks she had spent in hiding. John felt a deep admiration for her resilience and skill. She was not merely surviving, she was thriving under the harshest conditions, using her intelligence and instincts to navigate a world that had been unkind to her. Yet there was a softness in her demeanor when she spoke to him, a willingness to let someone else share the burden of care, even if only for a short while. After a while, they reached a small clearing near the edge of the desert, where the sunlight fell warmly and the wind whispered through the grass. John suggested they rest for a moment, and Naomi sat down on a flat rock, her eyes scanning the horizon. John joined her, feeling the weight of the silence between them. It was a comfortable silence, filled with the sounds of the desert, the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of small animals in the brush, and the occasional whisper of wind through the cacti. The moment was peaceful, yet beneath it lay an unspoken understanding of the fragility of their situation. John spoke first, breaking the quiet. "You know, it's not just the desert that's dangerous," he said. "Sometimes it's the people. I can see why you've been hiding. The world can be unkind to those who are different or vulnerable." Naomi nodded slowly. "I've learned that the hard way," she said softly. "That is why I had to be careful. I could trust very few people, and even then not completely. Trust is something you must earn, not something you give lightly." John understood her words deeply. He had spent his life working with animals and people alike, and he knew that trust was fragile and precious. They spent the next hours carefully exploring the surrounding area, staying close to the house, but venturing far enough to enjoy the beauty of the desert. John showed Naomi a small stream hidden behind a cluster of rocks, where the water was clear and cool. She knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink, her eyes lighting up with a rare moment of relief and joy. John watched her, feeling a sense of satisfaction in providing a small measure of comfort after all she had endured. They collected a few stones and herbs along the way, making small discoveries that reminded them both of the simple pleasures of life, even in a place marked by hardship. As the afternoon approached, John realized that he needed to discuss the future with Naomi. She could not remain hidden in the house indefinitely, and he wanted to ensure her safety. They returned inside, where the air was cooler and the house felt protective against the harsh desert sun. John spoke carefully, wanting to choose his words with care. "Naomi, we need to think about what comes next. You can't stay here forever, and you deserve a safe place, somewhere you won't have to hide. I want to help you find that." Naomi's expression was thoughtful, her eyes reflecting both hope and hesitation. "I don't know where to go," she admitted. "Everywhere I know is dangerous. And I cannot trust many people." Her voice was quiet, but there was an underlying strength in it. John nodded, understanding the difficulty of her situation. "We will find a way," he said gently. "We will look for someone trustworthy, someone who can help you, even if it takes time. You don't have to face this alone anymore." Naomi seemed to consider his words carefully, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that she might be able to trust another person, at least enough to accept help. As evening approached, John suggested they prepare a small meal together. It was an unusual experience for Naomi, who had been surviving largely on her own for weeks. Yet she followed his lead, learning quickly and appreciating the simplicity of cooking with someone she could trust. They shared bread, vegetables, and water, eating slowly and exchanging quiet conversation. The act of preparing food together, so ordinary yet so significant, became a moment of connection, a step toward rebuilding trust and a sense of normalcy. After the meal, they sat together near the window, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. The sky turned shades of deep orange and purple, and the desert seemed to stretch endlessly before them. John felt a profound respect for Nayeli, for the courage she had shown in surviving alone, and for the trust she was now placing in him. He realized that their meeting was no accident, that sometimes people appear in our lives to remind us of the strength and resilience that exist even in the most difficult circumstances. Nayeli spoke then, her voice soft but steady. "I have not had a friend in a long time," she said. "I have been alone for so long that I forgot how it feels to trust someone, but now I feel safer here with you." John smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said. "We will face the next steps together. You are not invisible and you are not forgotten. You deserve safety and kindness, and I will help you find it." The house, once empty and still, now felt alive with human connection, a place where courage, trust, and empathy could flourish. They had begun to build a bond, one that would carry them through the challenges ahead, providing strength, hope, and a sense of shared purpose. By the end of the night, John knew that their path forward would not be easy. Nayeli could not remain hidden forever, and there were dangers beyond the safety of the house. Yet, he also knew that together, they could navigate the challenges, finding safety, trust, and perhaps even a sense of belonging. The events of the day had shown him the remarkable resilience of the human spirit, and he felt privileged to witness Nayeli's courage firsthand. Their story was only beginning, and the bond they had formed would guide them through the uncertainty ahead. The desert morning arrived with a soft, golden light, and John Miller awoke to the calm stillness of the small house. The events of the past days weighed on him, yet there was a sense of purpose in his heart. Nayeli had spent several nights in the house, and each day brought more trust and understanding between them. He knew that the time had come to help her find a safe place beyond the temporary shelter he had offered. While the task ahead would not be easy, John felt ready. He understood that Nayeli's survival depended not only on caution, but also on finding someone reliable, someone who could ensure her safety. He prepared a simple breakfast, quietly placing it near Nayeli's corner. She stirred as the warm aroma reached her dark eyes meeting his with a hint of determination. There was a quiet understanding in the air today would be the day they moved forward, seeking a solution together. Nayeli had grown accustomed to being cautious and solitary, yet she trusted John enough to follow his lead. It was a fragile trust, built carefully over days of observation, conversation, and shared moments of quiet reflection. After breakfast, John spoke softly. "We should start planning our journey. It's important to be careful, but we also need to find a place where you will be safe for longer than just a few nights. I know someone who might be able to help, but we have to be cautious on the way there." Nayeli nodded, her eyes alert but calm. She had already begun to internalize the routines of safety, moving quietly and observing the surroundings, yet now she was willing to take a small step forward, guided by someone she could trust. They set out together, walking along a narrow, dusty path that led away from the small house and deeper into the desert. The sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow on the rugged landscape. John pointed out safe areas to walk and avoid, sharing his knowledge of hidden creeks, small thickets, and places where shadows could provide cover. Nayeli followed closely, her steps precise and deliberate, her senses attuned to every sound and movement. The desert, which had once seemed harsh and unforgiving to her, now felt like a shared space where two people could navigate together with careful planning. As they moved along, John and Nayeli talked quietly about the past, the present, and the uncertain future. Nayeli shared more about her village, her family, and the traditions that had shaped her life. She spoke of festivals, songs, and stories passed down through generations. moments of joy that had been overshadowed by the dangers forcing her into hiding. John listened, fascinated by her experiences, and occasionally shared anecdotes from his ranch about the early mornings, the quiet satisfaction of completing hard work, and the moments when the land seemed to come alive with beauty and possibility. Their conversation was gentle, a bridge connecting two very different lives, yet bound by shared resilience and humanity. Hours passed, and the sun climbed toward midday. The desert heat intensified, and the wind carried the dry scent of earth and sage. John suggested a short rest, and they found a small shaded area near a cluster of rocks. They drank water and sat quietly, listening to the desert life around them, the faint chirping of birds, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, and the distant howl of a coyote. For a brief moment, the harsh reality of survival was softened by the peacefulness of the landscape. Naomi looked at John and gave a small, grateful smile. It was a rare expression of trust, a signal that she had begun to feel protected, at least for now. When they resumed their journey, John spoke cautiously. "There's a woman I know, lives further east. She helps people who need safety, and she has a place where you can stay for as long as you need. But we have to reach her without attracting attention." Naomi's eyes widened slightly. She had been alone for so long, and the idea of finding someone trustworthy seemed almost unimaginable. Yet, the hope in John's voice encouraged her. She nodded, silently agreeing to follow him, placing her trust in the man who had offered kindness when she had expected none. The path grew more rugged as they ventured further into the desert. Rocks and uneven ground slowed their progress, and the sun's heat pressed down on them relentlessly. Yet, both moved with careful determination. John noticed how skilled Naomi had become at navigating the desert. She could sense hidden dips in the ground, avoid patches of loose sand, and step carefully to minimize sound. Her abilities, honed over weeks of hiding, were impressive. He felt admiration for her strength and resilience, and he knew that these qualities would serve her well in the days ahead. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began its descent, they reached a narrow valley where a small creek flowed, hidden among the rocks. John suggested they rest, refill their water, and gather their strength for the final stretch. Naomi crouched near the water, cupping her hands to drink, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and determination. She had survived so much, and yet she had endured with quiet courage. John admired her fortitude, realizing that the journey they had undertaken together was more than a physical one. It was a journey of trust, resilience, and human connection. As the sky turned orange and purple, John led Naomi toward the final leg of their journey. He moved carefully, scanning the landscape for any signs of danger. Naomi followed, silent and observant, trusting his guidance while remaining aware of her surroundings. Each step was deliberate, a careful balance between caution and progress. The house she had been hiding in was now far behind them, a symbol of temporary refuge, but the path ahead promised something more, a chance for safety, stability, and perhaps even a new beginning. Finally, as dusk approached, they reached the small house where the woman John had mentioned lived. It was modest but well kept, surrounded by a small garden and a few trees that offered shade and shelter. John knocked gently, and moments later, the door opened to reveal a kind-eyed woman who greeted them with warmth and understanding. John explained briefly who Naomi was and why she needed help. The woman listened carefully, her expression filled with compassion and concern. She nodded, signaling that Naomi would be safe there. Naomi hesitated for a moment, glancing at John with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Then she stepped forward, allowing the woman to welcome her into the safe space. John watched quietly, feeling a sense of relief and pride. He had helped her reach safety, and in doing so, he had witnessed extraordinary courage and resilience. Naomi, who had survived weeks alone in fear and isolation, now had a place to rest, recover, and regain a sense of normalcy. After ensuring that Naomi was comfortable and had everything she needed, John prepared to leave. He and Naomi exchanged a quiet, meaningful look, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed over the past days. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." John smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "You were brave," he said. "You survived because of your strength. I just helped you take the next step." Stars appeared in the sky, bright and distant, stretching endlessly over the quiet land. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had played a small part in someone's journey to safety. The experience had changed him as well. It had reminded him of the resilience of the human spirit, the importance of trust, and the quiet power of kindness. He knew he would never forget Nayeli, her courage, and the extraordinary events that had brought them together. The next days back at the ranch were filled with reflection. John continued his daily work, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and managing the land. Yet, his thoughts often returned to Nayeli and the journey they had shared. He thought of her strength, her careful vigilance, and the trust she had placed in him. It reminded him that life could change in an instant, that encounters with strangers could become meaningful, and that even the smallest acts of kindness could have a profound impact on someone's life. Though their paths had diverged, John knew that the experience had left a lasting impression on both of them. Nayeli had found safety, and he had witnessed the extraordinary courage of someone who had survived alone against incredible odds. Their story was one of resilience, trust, and human connection, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, compassion and courage could guide people toward hope. In the quiet moments of the evening, as he watched the sun set over his ranch, John smiled softly. The desert stretched endlessly, its beauty both harsh and magnificent. He knew that somewhere out there, Nayeli was safe, rebuilding her life and carrying with her the strength and wisdom that had carried her through the most difficult weeks of her life. And he, too, carried the memory of their journey, a story of courage, trust, and the extraordinary power of human kindness.